Solomon Asch performed an experiment where a group of people sat around a table for presumably an experiment testing visual perception. All but one of the subjects were Confederates. Individuals knew that the experiment actually tested a key part of social psychology, or the study of how we think about, influence, and relate to one another. Conformity, or the adjusting of one's behavior to fit a group's standard. The study consisted of 3 trials, each involving matching a given line to its identical pair in a group of 3. In the first and second trial, each person in the group solved the easy problem. However, in the third trial, the Confederates each answered the same wrong answer. Asch wanted to see if his subject would conform to the group's standard and answer the problem incorrectly. What he found was that 1/3 of the subjects were affected by the need to conform and answered incorrectly. While this idea may seem painless, imagine if our need to conform existed in a precarious situation. The common phrase, told to us since childhood, "If your friends jumped off a bridge, would you follow?" comes to mind. Take a look at another study performed by Bibb Lantine and John M. Darley. In this smoke-filled room experiment, 3/4 of people stayed in a potentially dangerous smoke-filled room only because other people, or Confederates, remained stationary. Sometimes our need to conform may put us in undesirable situations. If you would like to learn more about these experiments, check out the sources that we used to do our research. We were inspired by Asch's work and desired to create our own experiment testing his results in our own school community. Thus, our question was, if North Broward students were presented with the pressure to conform, will they change their views to the group's standard? In this way, we were testing normative social influence, or the social draw of avoiding disapproval or gaining approval. We were banking on the fact that our subjects would want to avoid the pain of answering a question incorrectly as their peers watch. To test our question, we decided to experiment on our hockey team. We asked each member to participate in our experiment that they thought was testing the historical knowledge of North Broward students. We asked them 3 questions. Who did the Americans fight in a war for independence? Who did the Americans fight in the War of 1812? And in what year was the Declaration of Independence signed? The assumption was made that our subjects should know the answers to these questions. We soon found that this assumption was quite presumptuous. And the first 2 questions, the Confederates answered correctly, but in the last question, they both answered an incorrect date. We were testing to see if our subject would conform and make the same mistake. We performed the experiment at our hockey rink and recorded using our mobile phones. We predicted that around 1/3 of our subjects would conform to the group standard and answer incorrectly. We had the confidence to make this assertion due to the results of Asch's study on conformity. Now let's take a look at the experiment.
First question is, who did we fight against in the War of American Independence?
Britain.
Second question, who did we fight against in the War of 1812?
Britain.
In what year was the Declaration of Independence signed?
1774.
Nah.
You have to answer the question.
It's 1777.
Who did we fight against in the War of American Independence?
The British.
The British.
Who did we fight against in the War of 1812?
The British.
The British.
The British.
What year was American independence signed?
1778.
1778.
1777.
Who did we fight against for the War of American Independence?
The British.
The British.
The British.
Who did we fight against in the War of 1812?
The British.
The British.
The British.
What year was the American independence signed?
1778.
1778.
1778.
The first question is, who do we fight against in the War of American Independence?
The British. The British.
The British.
Who do we fight against in the War of 1812?
The British. The British.
The British.
What year was the Declaration of Independence signed?
1778.
1776.
The first question is, who do we fight against in the War of Independence?
Britain.
Britain.
Great Britain.
The second question, who do we fight against in the War of 1812?
Britain.
The British.
There was no War of 1812.
Third question is, what year was the Declaration of Independence signed?
1775.
1775.
1778.
The first question is, who do we fight against in the American War of Independence?
Britain.
Britain.
The second question, who do we fight against in the War of 1812?
Britain.
Britain.
What year was the Declaration of Independence signed?
1775.
1775.
1775.
Our hypothesis that 1/3 of the experimenters would conform to society was slightly incorrect. Only 25%, or 3 out of 12, the test subject conformed to society on the last question. However, if we go by just answering the question correctly or not, our hypothesis was correct because one of our test subjects flat out answered the last question incorrectly. Even though we were slightly off in our prediction, we could still conclude that many people are willing to lie in order to conform to a group because we were only one person off of matching Ash's 33%. In our experiment, we tested on whether people would conform to society or whether they would answer the questions truthfully. We found that more often than not, the person would not conform to society. However, there was one major error in our experiment. The questions may have been too hard for the experimenter to answer. It wasn't that they were necessarily conforming to society, they just did not know the answer. For instance, when we experimented on Luke, he wasn't conforming to us because he answered differently, but he answered wrong. If we were to do this experiment again, we would try to ask even easier questions and use people who were in a high GPA range or people who had taken a high school level U.S. history course. That way, we would know that the person knew the real answers to the questions and therefore see if they were going to lie. Also, we could perhaps ask a more subjective question, like what's your favorite book? And we could also use more Confederates to pressure the experimenter more.